to speak about designing educational tools based on body interaction for children with special needs who present different motor skills. So, over to you.
Okay. Hello everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the ITAG committee to give me the opportunity to present my work today. I'm Bernardo Sali and I'm going to present how I design educational tools based on body interaction for children with special needs who present different motor skills. First, let me show you our general motivation. We start from an activity that can be boring and try to find a very good recipe, represented here as black box, where the objective is to create an interesting tool in order to improve specific skills. So the point is how to define that black box. Several researchers work on that purpose, and I'm going to present you three categories that are related to our work. So the first category of application is called exerting. The goal is to having fun through video games, but the real hidden objective is having physical activity. The second one is about rehabilitation. It's often supervised by professionals that use applications such as video games and with a specific technology associated. And the third category is about learning specific motor skills such as posture and gestures. Although we can find a very interesting idea in the literature, it still exists some issues. First, the accessibility. Indeed, motor disabilities may hinder the use of application beyond the physical interaction. Then, the impact. Although a lot of work is done on activities for children with special needs, few of them are very applicable at school. And finally, the adaptation. Specialized schools tend to adapt their educational program to the needs of the children, because as we know, each child has his own specific need. So, we think that application should adapt to the children too. At the beginning of that project, we tried to organize our ideas and write down the different steps to achieve the project. And this is what we drew. At the input, we have the technology that is going to use to work specific skills that can be used at home or at school. And then we will need an evaluation to ensure that the project is correct. So our first step was to define which technology we are going to use and which skills we are going to work with. So for that, we decided to work actively with a specialized state school in Spain. At the beginning, we presented them our project, and as they are very interested in it, we could start a collaboration. So we looked over the educational program that I listed here, and we could observe that most of them were related to body skills. By body skills, we understand that we have to work balance, sensation, proprioception, and other kind of stimulation. That's why we decided to work with the Microsoft Kinect. The Microsoft Kinect is initially a device for the video console Xbox, and that permits to track and get information about the skeleton of the player. The advantages are that the player can interact with the whole body, it accepts several players, and it's compact and cheap, what are very important points for schools and families. And the drawbacks are the small resolution and consequently the precision. Looking further on the educational program, we could highlight the importance of creativity. And by creativity, we understand what we have to work: music, painting, imagination, and corporal expression. Here, corporal expression is the art where the body is the medium to express emotions and the interaction between the inner self and the environment. So all these ideas brought us to two main objectives. The first one is to make the children able to work with the application almost regardless of their motor skills. I said almost because, as we know, it's impossible. And the second objective is to provoke interest and motivation to children in order to work educational aspects. In order to fulfill that objective, we think that applications should respect these 3 points. First, the children must work individually or in mini-group in order to promote active participation. Second, as we know, each child has his own specific needs, so we need different kind of applications. And we also know that each child has his own motor skills, so we need different ways of interaction. For these reasons, we decided to work on a framework more than on a specific activity. And in order to adapt the future activities to the needs of the children, we need to use user profiles. And who says user profiles says configuration. And by configuration, we mean that we need several options for the same action. So in other words, we need several interaction techniques. An interaction technique is the way to communicate with the software, and this is usually done through graphical user interfaces, and they are commonly grouped in 4 categories: windows, icons, menus, and pointers. So according to the windows and the pointers, the main question is how we can access all parts of the screen. So for that, we propose 3 options, 3 interaction techniques. The absolute one, in that one, we consider that the projection of your body in the screen, and more particularly, the hand is the pointer. So the children have to move to reach all parts of the screen. The second one is is relative. So in that case, we propose 2 virtual screens, one for each hand, and with the idea with the large movement, we can access all parts of the screen. And we also propose smaller screen but in that case, the movement is not so large, but we lose also in precision. According to the icons, we also propose, the main question is how to activate a button. And for that, we also propose 3 options. Pointing at the button and wait for a time. Or pointing at the button and close the hand to activate it. Or simply by picking the keyword of the button, because all the buttons on that framework own a keyword that is written above it. According to the menus, we have 2 main questions. How to activate the menu. So at the beginning, we thought about the web gesture, but we quickly saw that it requires certain control with the speed of execution. So we also propose to touch the head with the hand in order to activate the menus. And the second question is how to navigate through a menu. So for that, we propose 3 different kinds of menus. The linear one on the right part is the classic one. Here the buttons are displayed at the top of the screen, and users have to point at them to activate the items. The second one is the marking menu. It's all techniques thought for rapid execution because items are placed in circle around the hand, and with a small movement we can access and select the items. And the last one is the body menu. Here the items are attached to certain part of the body, so in order to activate the button, users have to touch the corresponding part of their own body. And finally, the last category of interaction is how to activate a state. For example, if I want to paint, I need to decide when to activate the brush, otherwise I will paint all the time. So for that, we also propose 3 options. Put one leg ahead, close your hand, and in the case that children cannot perform this gesture, the teacher can activate the state by clicking on the button who is going to be displayed at the screen. Because let me tell you that all the action can be performed by mouse, so that teacher can help the children at any time. All these interaction techniques are presented here, or were here to answer our first objective, that was adapting the framework to the needs of the children. But now we need activities in order to motivate the children in working with the framework. So for that, we developed 3 activities related to creativity. The first one is painting with the body, with the hands. By the way, in that picture you can see the 2 squares that represent the virtual screen, that represent the space where the hand has to move in order to access all the screen. So in that activity, and according to the configuration of course, children can paint with both hands separately, and they can change the color and the size of the brush through the menus. And we also propose to play a song associated with the movement of the hands while painting, while the state is activated, in order to promote the cause-effect reaction. In the second activity, children are asked to discover a blurred image by cleaning the screen with the hands. Here the teacher can change the image of the background, obviously. And finally, the third activity is about creating music. The interaction is mainly done through menu navigation, so children can choose a musical instrument or musical notes. The selected notes will be displayed at the bottom of the screen, so that the whole song can be played. So now we have chosen the technology and the activities. In order to ensure that the project is valid, we conduct a user study with 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, during 3 sessions, 1 per week. The setup was very simple. Big screen, the Kinect, and the children played between 1.5 meter and 2 meters. So now, let me present you the children we work with. The first one is Mr. Brown. He's 15 and his cognitive age is about 8-9. He suffers intellectual disabilities and oppositional distance disorder. He doesn't show any motor disability. He was asked to play during 20 minutes per session and was asked to draw a house that was a square and triangle above with the same color. Then he was asked to draw a square, change the color with the menu, and draw the triangle. He was also asked to choose a specific musical instrument and play specific sequences of notes ordered by the teacher. The teacher defined a specific personal objective for each child. These objectives were somehow what they expected to improve with the framework. And overall, the results of Mr. Brown was very satisfying as he could achieve all the objectives fixed by the teacher. In addition, we could observe a slight improvement in the regulation of his conduct, and he was really willing to play. And after he complained a lot when he failed, he persevered in executing the orders of the teacher. The second child is Mr. White. He's 15 and his cognitive age is about 7-8. He suffers intellectual disabilities plus cerebral palsy. He's tetraplegic and he needs the use of a wheelchair. Mr. White played during 15 minutes per session and was asked to clear the screen and discover the content of an image. That content was related to the content of the class, and at that moment it was communication media. Once the image was cleared, the teacher asked him some question about the use of that media. And as we can see, Mr. Watt was a good student because he could answer all the questions. And the problem is the interaction. At the beginning was very difficult because Mr. White did very fast and uncontrolled movement. But we told him that the slower the movement of the arm was, and the better the image was cleared. And we could observe that Mr. White did a real effort to control his gestures. The third child is Mr. Orange. He's 14 and his cognitive age is about 7-8. He suffers intellectual disabilities and degenerative muscular dystrophy, but he don't need the use of a wheelchair. Mr. Orange played during 15 minutes per session and was asked to choose a musical instrument and play specific sequences of notes. For that, he used the linear menu, so the temps were displayed at the top of the screen. And although Mr. Orange has a low balance, he moves consequently to reach the items. But he quickly felt tired and needed the back of a chair to maintain himself, to support his body. Then the teacher was interested in how he can execute orders, and we detected that Mr. Orange could follow one order but couldn't follow two consecutive ones. Sorry. The fourth child is Mrs. Brown. She's 18 and her cognitive age is about 4-5. She suffers cognitive and intellectual disabilities, and she doesn't show any motor disability. She used the application during 20 minutes per session and was asked to draw circles with one hand, with the other hand, and with both hands symmetrically. She was also asked to discover an image that was a classmate or an event she had participated in. Overall, Mrs. Blount did not show any improvement along these 3 sessions. During the 2 first sessions, I've turned my page. Sorry. So she could perform circles with both hands separately, but she couldn't perform the gesture symmetrically. According to the second activity, she could clear the screen without any problem, and she didn't show much interest to discover a new image when the image is corresponding to a classmate. For the first session, the image corresponded to an event she had participated in, and she was somehow more enthusiastic. Anyway, her teacher said that Mrs. Blonde is very, very obedient and it's sometimes very difficult to know if she does things really willingly. The fifth child is Mrs. Pink. She's 20, her cognitive age is about 6-7, and she suffers cognitive and intellectual disabilities plus cerebral palsy. she showed difficulties to execute the voluntary movement, and she needed the use of a wheelchair. She used the application during 10 minutes per session, and she was asked to discover an image that was a classmate or an event she had participated in. However, Mrs. Pink didn't show any interest in the framework in general. And although she presented difficulties in executing voluntary movement, she could clear the screen without any help, but the movements were not very accurate, but they were good enough for that application. For the two first sessions, the image is corresponding to a classmate, and she wasn't willing to clear a new one. But for the last session, we decided to put events she had participated in, and in that case, she was willing to clear a new photo. And finally, the last boy is Mr. Blue. He's 8, and his cognitive age is about 6 months. He suffers intellectual disabilities plus cerebral palsy. He has partial control of the arms, and he uses the wheelchair. However, he participated during 30 minutes per session and was asked to discover an image that was a classmate. Once the image was cleared, 2 real photos of his classmates were presented to him, and he had to choose the good one. However, he didn't show any insight of recognition, and because he mainly pays attention to sounds and lights, and although we used the cause-effect relation, so with the sound associated to the movement of the hands, he didn't show any insight of motivation. And if sometimes he was smiling and seemed to pay attention to the framework, which were not significant as they depended a lot on the mood Mr. Blue had that day. So, to sum up, and I wanted to show you the large spectrum of cognitive and motor disability we are working with. And so consequently, we needed a framework that adapts the needs of the children. According to our first objective, 5 out of 6 children could interact without any difficulties, and we know that it's impossible to have a device that adapts to that fits to the need of everyone. But in that case, Mr. White, we could have said that with Mr. White, he did a real effort to control his movements. And anyway, the study shows us that the interaction techniques were numerous enough and fits well with the need of the children. So that's why we argue that devices that propose natural interaction, such as Kinect, can be used as adaptive and assistive technology. Concerning our second objective, we use very simple interfaces with visual and auditory feedbacks in order to promote the participation. Mr. Brown, Mr. White, and Mr. Rowan was really willing to play and enjoy the session. In the case of Mrs. Blonde and Mrs. Pink, it seemed that at the end we could find something that brought interest in hers, and that was discover an image of an event they participated in. And in the case of Mr. Blue, due to his disabilities, it was very difficult to draw any conclusions. But his teacher says that when he entered the room, he was smiling and paid attention to the screen. Anyway, and I'm going to conclude here. We really think that activities should be customizable by the teacher in order to adapt the content to the needs of the children. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions.
Thank you for keeping time. It does leave us with 5 minutes or so for questions. Who would like to start? Yes, Penny.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you actually decided whether the children or your participants had achieved what they set out to achieve. So, for example, you had self-esteem.
They had, sorry?
Self-esteem.
Yeah, so...
How did you decide whether they had shown an improvement in self-esteem?
So the school, so first before designing the activities, we talked with the teachers and they defined the objective. At the school they had some criteria, some questions, so if they were smiling, if there are a lot of criteria on the face recognition, on the emotions and the way they interact. So they have different questions. And during the session, they ticked them, and so in the end we could compare.
So teacher assessment.
Yeah, it was by teachers. So all this stuff was designing with teachers, not with children. So the teacher decided what the children had to do during the sessions, because they feel that it was better for them.
How do you measure the cognitive age of the participants?
The school told me that. I asked her more detail about their disabilities, but they couldn't give us that information, and they just tell me that. And the therapist told them that they had more or less that age. So I have no physical proof on that.
Yes.
Do you think that the game that you choose were quite good for the type of children with disabilities, or do you think that maybe other kind of games would be better?
With the school we are working now in Spain, so they are very low cognitive level, so it was large enough. At the beginning I wanted to do something more interesting with mathematical problems or puzzles solving, but teacher told me, no, that's impossible. The children were working with it's impossible. In that case, in these activities, it's just free mode. You can do everything you want. You don't have any restriction by the stand. Now it's something I want to do. So I'm here just to work with high-functioning autistic children, and in that case I want to work more in the cognitive aspect and have a better challenge.
You mentioned about the teachers. Maybe one of the issues in terms of research is the expectation of the teacher. So they said, oh, I don't think they could do this, or they're working, and you may need to challenge that. Maybe they have high enough expectations what the young people might be able to do. So because they're only given a certain amount of information, but certainly expectation is something you need to be challenging teachers with.
Yeah, it was something very difficult because we are in two different worlds, and just to understand each other it was very, very hard, because I was thinking something, they were thinking other thing, and I still don't have any answer for that.
Well, I mean, in the world of special education, I can tell you this, that there are still many people who have lower expectations of the children, so you will have to, your research will be about heightening people's expectations.
Okay, let's give another round of applause. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker. So our second presentation in this section is an investigation of gamification typologies for enhancing learner motivation, and it's being presented by Gary.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, depending whether we've stepped over that time piece at the minute. My name is Donald Charles. I'm presenting this research on behalf of my PhD student who wasn't able to travel today, so hopefully I can do it just some justice. The central aspect of this research is looking at learners, and we've worked with university students, first year and second year university students over the last, say, about 8 years, to look at how we can gamify learning processes to engage students, scaffold, change behaviour, improve the learning processes, help them understand, learn to learn. And we've looked at using virtual worlds for that. Bring this next slide up. There was a virtual world called MetaPlace, which I really loved, and it's now dead. But I used this in the first instance to look at being able to modify the virtual world to represent the learner. So it was a kind of a gamification where the avatar would represent the learner and the world itself would represent the learner. But also we could embed learning material, and the topography of the landscape could inform the learner about the nature of that knowledge somehow, or the process of learning. So that's largely it's broadly the area that we're interested in. What we've discovered in the last few years, not too surprising, but people are different, and we find that students react differently to stimuli and gamification. So we've decided then we're going to look at that and see if we could uncover some of the differences and perhaps personalise the gamification to individuals. There are some well-known theories on the differences between people, and so we don't have time to dwell on this, but you can see the Kiersey temperament. There's some really nice labels, and there are nice variations on the way that people would see themselves and the things that they would be more engaged with. They're quite different from the artistic person right through to someone who's perhaps a little bit more focused and challenge-oriented, perhaps. So get the flick to go. We also know that there are differences in the way people learn. We also know that there are relationships between learning theories and game design, and several writers have written about the relationship between learning and game playing. So it's worthwhile taking into account the fact that people learn in different ways as well. This is quite a famous model. We also know that players are different, and players play in different ways. That may relate to their psychology and their basic makeup. So this is an old typology by Bartle, and it was specifically for MUDs, multi-user dungeons, so it may have been a very specific group of people. We have done some research looking at Bateman's model, using a more generic way of defining the differences between players, and again rooted in temperament theory. We found in that research that there were certainly differences in the way people played, and the challenging thing I have to say, and we're getting to this, is how to get at the differences through questionnaires, for example. And it's a bit easier actually if you watch actual behaviour. My wife, Therese Charles, one of the co-authors, and her PhD looked at learning theories and learning theories about engagement in particular, and also looking at games and how games engage. And she condensed 30 basic fundamental types into 6. And if you look at these, you'll see as we go along, fun's an obvious one, identity, social engagement, challenge, which is at core to games, many games, structure, and feedback. All of these things overlap in so many ways, both through the temperaments and also to some of the gamification ideas that we're looking at. Also, I'm going to indulge and talk a little bit about this. So it's worth bearing in mind that there are differences between the way people interact with playful experiences. So first of all, it's useful, well, perhaps a prerequisite that you have a illusory attitude, that you are engaged by something that's not real, it's fantasy. And there are some people, like my mother, for example, who doesn't really engage with movies, never mind games. Not that she's a bad person. Play, there are some people who are very playful. So people that would engage with Minecraft, for example, are more creative, more playful, and they're not so interested in beating the other player or beating their own score. So it's obvious, but it's important. A game inherently has some challenge, and typically would have a way of understanding what the outcome is. We can use these sort of ideas when we think about whoops, I've done it as well. Gamification. And gameplay, just to point out that this nice statement by Crawford about the gameplay being derived from a combination of pace and cognitive effort, showing us that there's an intellectual activity involved with with both play and games. So gamification, some of you may have heard of it, some of you not. Some of you may think it's an offensive term. A person I met recently called it gamification, which I thought was a nice word. There are a few points here, but I don't really want to dwell well in definition. I want to talk about some thoughts I have about gamification from working with it. I just need to click this button more. Two of the things that have come into my mind lately when I've thought about gamification are influence and support, and also thinking about being intrinsically motivated and being extrinsically motivated. The first one, influence, if you look at how people define gamification within the business community, it's quite often about influence people to engage with their product, their website. They're trying to get people to do things. In an educational context, the most important thing for us is the second one. It's support. It's being able to support people to do what they want to do. So a lot of my students want to learn. They want to obtain knowledge, to become better at tasks, to develop skills. They want to do this, but also some of my students don't want to attend or get out of bed and be reliable, and a lot of these sorts of things. So we actually need both. I think in education terms, I think we need both in gamification terms. We need a scaffold by rewarding for in an intrinsic sense, but we also must realise that it's the intrinsic motivation that's the crucial thing. And these are four factors that some of you will have been aware of, but they're worth dwelling on for a little while. Relatedness, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So the social side, people are motivated because we are social beings. Autonomy, we are more motivated but when we have a choice and we have some freedom. Mastery, that we have an opportunity to become particularly good at something and to be able to develop that skill. And purpose, why are we doing it? I recently applied this just generally to my final year class by allowing them to choose their coursework, thinking that would be great, autonomy and purpose, and some of them totally freaked out. So even with giving people autonomy, it might need some support and scaffolding. So on to the experiment that we performed. We chose to use a gamification typology by Marcheski. I can't pronounce his name, apologies for that, Marcheski. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's one of the few typologies that exists to distinguish between different types of people. And he's based it on a lot of the things that we've seen before. So the intrinsic motivation, temperament theory, Bartle's models, and so on. So, and he's also been using a questionnaire that we've adapted. So it allowed us to use a pre-existing tool to be able to get into this world. And the particular experiment we're talking about here, we had two separate modules. One was web-based and more traditionally presented, and another one, the games module, which was a little bit more tailored to gamification. We created a virtual world reflex that students were able to access the content and receive feedback, and also the gamification was implemented in that. We developed lots of different prototypes and a couple of full-scale examples. This particular world was the last one, the one we used here. We kept it fairly simple to focus on the gamification based on a lot of different types of feedback. There are some issues when you have a virtual space that becomes 3D virtual space, becomes bigger, and if you ask students to walk around that space, They don't like it. It's also not very good game design practice. So we have quite a small world here. And in the world, you can see we've actually this little island. And on the island, you can look at your achievements, you can change and tailor your avatar, you can look at leaderboards. So a lot of the gamification features are accessible to you visually. But then, what interests me is that you literally move around this landscape. That's something that I find very interesting. Just briefly to say, it probably took us more time to develop the back end for this, the tracking data and so on. I'll not dwell on it, it's a bit too geeky perhaps. The motivation for the virtual world, some of the reasons for using the virtual world. Well, we have agency and we have situated learning. I think it can be important, especially important when we want to have a broad range of gamification features. There's a literal exploration, and socialization is a little bit different when you're in a 3D context, 3D avatars. That's potentially a bit more rich. We can, as our research goes on, make much more of the topographical representation of the learning and the learning feedback within the world. I think there are a lot of interesting things that we can do as we go forward, looking at, for example, heat maps and trajectories, looking at what they do literally and linking that into what we think they should be doing pedagogically. So the methodology we use is a mixed approach, using a convergent parallel design, where we essentially we're giving the students questionnaires at the start of the semester. They engage with the world. We track that. We track everything they do. At the end of the semester, then we've analysed the student questionnaires, and we're currently still finishing off the student tracking. It's a big process. So unfortunately, we have some initial findings on that. And we're then looking at a way of seeing the links between that and see if what we predicted they should be doing or what they predicted of themselves really is what they actually did. And hopefully develop a better typology and perhaps even not have to rely on the questionnaires, which would be ideal. We prefer to be able to implement gamification within the virtual world on some firm basis and then do the tracking from there. So the typology looks like this. I don't know if this sort of thing is familiar to you. It's a mix of some of the methods I've shown before. But essentially we have on the corners of this cube, philanthropists, achievers, free spirits, and socializers would be the individual types for intrinsically motivated people. On the other side, self-seekers, consumers, exploiters, and networkers would be more extrinsically motivated, and we have rewards that we can tailor into that. I think I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to keep moving. So we have the 8 basic core types on the right-hand side, and what we've done, or what Markeski has done, is attach certain core gamification features to each of those types. So we can lift those gamification features, implement them in the world, offer them as gamification feedback to our students, and then track if they engage with that. So here are some of the examples that we've implemented in the world. We've used badges heavily, so badges were able to be used to reward people for example, being explorative, or in some cases, if they're trying to exploit things, we also give them feedback on that, give them a badge and track that. But a lot of these things are reasonably standard in terms of gamification. The questionnaire, based on what Markeski has used himself, we've adapted it to our context. And so we have these 4 intrinsic types, and they're linked to the intrinsic core factors. 4 questions each, which we then averaged afterwards. and the same for the extrinsic gamification factors. Don't know if I have time to explain these fully, just maybe very quickly, better we go very quickly. Let's just look at the results and we can talk about the types. So, looking at the average results, philanthropist statistics, our students weren't particularly altruistic. That is perhaps not surprising given the context of being higher education, and they're already thinking about their own marks to some extent in their own education. Self-seeker, on the other hand, is actually quite loaded towards the right of the distribution. So our students were quite self-seeking. I don't think that's a surprise. They also were quite consumer-oriented, and you're going to see on the left-hand side they would react on the basis of achievement. So we have a positive link between consumption and achievement, where achievement is really more intrinsically motivated, where the consumption is really just doing it for the sake of the rewards. Both are actually quite useful. The philanthropist shouldn't be ignored, because there are some students that did demonstrate the altruistic sort of side of things. Social, both the networker and socialer, both the selfish socializer, if you want, and the socializer for the intrinsic meaning in that, both important factors. That's not surprising if you saw the previous models that we looked at. These are something we need to go into much further. These are more outliers. Your free spirits, and these are maybe, you might want to put it very bluntly, like mavericks, people on the edges, outliers. But there's some interesting behaviour, and they could well be motivated with the right types of rewards. I've only a few minutes left, so we did a principal component analysis on the results to try and see if we could get to a better understanding between the variables. You can see, just for example, the philanthropist being the 8th most important factor, if you want, on the right-hand side. Second principal component's got quite strong reliance on socializer and free spirit. Achiever is quite dominant, quite along, the principal components. One of the things you see, it is difficult, it really is, difficult to get a questionnaire that distinguishes between people. We did an exploratory factor analysis where it kind of cleaned up, allowed us to compress and look at a graph of that. But you can see that there's still when you projected the users on it, they're quite clustered in the middle. But this does quite nicely, picks out, for example, the second factor has got socializer, free spirit, and exploiter as being independent factors in this very strong compression. Really don't have time to go through this, unfortunately, but there's we also did a k-means clustering for a much larger set of groups. And when you dive into the details of this, you can see some interesting factors. So the largest group, for example, has got a large, when the cluster center, for the cluster center for this cluster, the self-seeker, consumer, and network are quite high. They're extrinsic rewards. So one of the biggest groups actually was responding to extrinsic rewards, which is something you obviously want to change behaviour as time went on. Apologies, I can't go into this in more detail. So we'll have a lot more to say about this once we finish the analysis, but basically there is a decent relationship between the way the students actually behave and how we predicted, or they predicted themselves to behave, with the exception of 16 errors in 11, cluster 11 and 12. If you look at clusters 11 and 12, the main thing that you maybe say about that is there are extrinsically motivated. It might be that these students weren't taking the questionnaire seriously. There's all sorts of reasons. We have to look at that more clearly. This is a brief look at the activities between these clusters, the 14 clusters per area, and also for the number of visits per learning area. We set it up so there was a prepare, a learn, and a test. So we had a very simple pedagogical model. And within the games module, which was more heavily gamified, they did exhibit a more healthy behaviour with regard to preparation, learning and testing than they did in the other module. So I think that probably the most interesting thing for us is that, was using this this typology and saying that it does seem to be promising in terms of the types of being able to use it to distinguish how we reward students and try to alter behaviour and support good behaviour. I think there's some promise there. We're also seeing, but it's too early to say, that there may be more interesting complex relationships between the 8 core types. So when all said and done, the gamification, the 8 variables create a profile. It's very, very difficult to find that one student would have one particular marker that represents them only. For example, philanthropist. It's more likely that you're going to have a range of values, and maybe that they would predominate in three types of motivation that they prefer. I think I'm going to stop.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we do have a few minutes for questions. So, if you want to use some groups.
Do you have any data how stable are those subtypes or across sessions in one game or across different games if people have the same profile for different games?
I haven't put up we have some information in the paper, but between the two modules, there's actually a very strong correlation between students and how they behave, in the games module and the web module. So that's reassuring.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Wait for the microphone.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I was also interested in that aspect, and I wondered about those typologies, whether they would apply to other groups of students who you wanted to make or help their learning through gamification.
The types are based on at the root on temperament theory and its broader ideas. So I think the answer is that they should be able to be, but you obviously have to look at it and see if it needs to be modified. I think if we continue with this work, we will be looking to try to get different types of labels. So we'd want to develop our own typology that might be simpler and maybe more broadly applicable.
Okay, there's obviously a lot there to think about, and we probably need a little bit longer to do the thinking. So can we give Charles another round of applause?
And just before we break, to say I've been asked to announce that, as you can see, the exhibition is going back up for the lunch period, so there will be another chance to look at the exhibition during that time. Other than that, we are breaking just over 5 minutes early, unless there are any other announcements to be made. I don't think so. Right, okay, thanks.